Layne Hilton. I've been with, in public safety now for 29 years. Started in corrections, did a little bit on the police end of it, went to fire, went back to police, went back to fire, intermingled with there, did some nursing, and have really enjoyed my career. How I got into this, I'll go over, but what drove me into becoming a therapist was my own PTSD and going through what that entails for us. Just to kind of, well, I always forget to give the disclaimer. What I talk about isn't necessarily the opinion of Unified Fire Authority. Check it with my coarse, foul, and abusive language. That's just me. I swear a lot, and if it bothers you, get over it quickly because I don't care. And that's just me. I've only ever had one complaint, and I told that guy I was sorry about his erectile dysfunction because I used a different term for that he was offended by. I believed it was gummy worming it, but that's just how that played out. So we are going to be talking about sexual issues in this lecture because that is one of the bigger areas that we see signs and symptoms with our PTSD, believe it or not. To start out with, they didn't ever really do research on first responders of any time until 2016 is when they started. The first time they noticed that we were different though was back in the 90s. How many of you had to take the personality psych test to get your job here? Okay, so you remember it? It is called the MMPI, which stands for Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is what it looks like. You have these histogram things here, and you have above and below, as you can see. And then you have these dots. This is an actual score sheet. If you score within this line, it means you're normal, whatever that means. The higher or lower you go on the extremes says that there's a chance of a mental illness, okay? This is where they first started to notice we were different. I've drawn a representation over here of this. What they noticed when they were doing, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, they noticed when giving the test that you had people that were scoring elevations in certain areas of personality. Again, this is that normal line, and they were elevated. These aren't all on the same page. I've condensed them down just so we can talk about them. The areas were narcissism, psychotic behavior, aggression, extroversion, and empathy. But if you notice, empathy is all the way at the top. There is a mental illness for empathy. We just happen to see a lot of that happening. Now about this test, we're now on the 3rd edition of it. This is a picture of the 2 if you ever want to geek out on it, but we are on the MMPI 3 now. It's been around for almost 80 years, and more science has been dumped into this test, I dare say, than any other test. The validity scales on it are ridiculous. If you are trying to, for example, fake that you have a mental illness, like for medical retirement, it'll pick it up. Or if you have a mental illness and you're trying to fake like you don't, it'll pick it up. This thing is dead accurate. And so when they first started doing this for police and fire, of course they weren't hiring anybody that scored elevated. But then they noticed that within corrections, within law enforcement, within fire, that they couldn't keep anybody on the job. They were only staying for about 5 years and then they were leaving. So as you know, putting somebody even through the first part of post is way expensive for departments to do, and so this was causing a huge financial drain. So they started to look into it. What they did is they went and they gave this test nationally, all over the US, to fire departments and police agencies, including corrections agencies. At the time, Salt Lake County, when it was a sheriff's office and the jail, they actually participated in this. County Fire also did. What they found when they gave it nationally was that the people on the job all scored like this. They weren't here, okay?
Sorry.
I don't think you're really sorry. There's no remorse. There's no weeping or welling or gnashing of teeth. Anyway, when we have these things, that causes a problem, particularly the psychotic behavior things. What they found is we are so different that they had to make a new test just for us. We broke this damn thing. And so now there's an MMPI that you take if you're in law enforcement or corrections. There's one that you take if you're fired, and there's one that you take if you're a nurse. That's one of the things that they've discovered with it is we need actually separate testing because we are that much different than the regular public. So when we take our test now, we score right as rain here. If the public takes it, they're all over the place. But if we take the public's test, we're all over the place. But if you think about it, why would narcissism be important for our job? What is narcissism?
You think you're the best.
Yeah, you have an elevated sense of self-importance, self-esteem, and belief in your own abilities above that of a regular person. It also means that you're good at telling people what to do. If there isn't a leader, you will take the role of that leader. We don't have NPD, despite what your ex probably told you, but we are elevated there. Aggression, it doesn't mean this, although it can mean that. More what it means is when we see a problem, we aggressively attack it. The best way I've heard it described is we are pointy-eared dogs in a world of floppy-eared dogs. And that's a good way to look at it. Extroversion, you cannot be shy and do these jobs. And empathy, we get into these jobs because we genuinely care about people. That's why that's so high. The psychotic behavior, think about it. You kind of have to be to do any of those things. It's interesting too, because if we take the empathy out of this really is a criminal profile. So we're not too far removed. And occasionally you'll see that bleed through. There's a number of different examples. If you know who Joseph D'Angelo is or was, Golden State Killer, Mike DeCorso, if any of you remember Mike, yay, Midvale Fire. I separated even though they work unified now. You have these people that will slip through the cracks because they are so similar. It's that empathy that separates us. Now, they have noticed some differences within jobs, but for the most part, that's the pattern. Well, because they gave this nationally and they gave it to different age groups, ethnicities, races, genders, they know that this doesn't occur because of the job. Okay? None of us were raised this way. We all have different jobs. So what they started to look at is more the biology of it. But the problem is this was in the late, they started looking at the 80s, they compiled the information in the late 90s, and then 2000s broke, and what happened in 2001? 9/11. And after that, they just kind of stopped the research. It kind of went away. And we became the finest and the bravest, whatever the hell that is. And we got free shit at 7-Eleven, and now we have this standard that we have to live up to. And we've seen that very similar process happen with COVID, with nursing. Suddenly you're these superheroes that never have to rest and don't even need to pee. And you can just go all day and it doesn't really matter. And you really enjoy putting cotton swabs in people's noses. And it becomes very difficult because the public's view on us and their opinions of us, when you take that hero status in, really does change how we view ourselves as well. And it can become a problem. Well, about 2015, there was a retired chief back east. His name is Jeff Dill. If you ever want to read any of Jeff's stuff, his articles that he publishes, they're pretty amazing. He's done a ton of research for us. Jeff didn't want to do therapy as much as he wanted to do research, so he became a research social worker. One of the things that he discovered in his research is our suicide rates are abnormally high. He didn't really know how high because there wasn't a way to track it. So he actually set up a national reporting system that tracks our suicide rates now. And he has found that they are on parity with the military per capita, if not higher. And so then he started to appeal to the federal government for need and necessity for mental health care for us. In 2016, they responded to that with a white paper. If anybody is ever interested in reading it, it's not light reading at all, but you can find it on the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation website, and it's called Initiative 13. For those of you in peer support, I would suggest you read it, simply because that's kind of how all of this started for us. The problem is they couldn't really get anybody to do research on us past that. Why do you think that is? What happens when they come up to us and say, hey, let's talk about your feelings? What do?
Right away.
I got a feeling for you, and then we walk away, right? That's us. We got really lucky though that there are two docs. One of them, his name is Bessel van der Kolk. He did a lot of research into this, and if any of you, it's again not an easy read, but he wrote a book called The Body Keeps a Score. I would read up to chapter 7. After 7, it gets kind of textbooky for therapists. It gets really heavy into EMDR and why EMDR is useful. But it goes into a really deep dive into what we're going to be talking about. One of the people that collaborated with him is named Andrew Smith. Andrew was an Afghan war vet. He did 2 tours there. He used GI Bill when he got home, became a psychologist, and he was working at a VA in Vermont. And he had a couple of patients come in, and they were first responders on their regular jobs, and then they were in the Guard otherwise. Came in for PTSD issues, and what he noticed was they didn't respond to the regular PTSD therapies the same way everybody else did. He got really fascinated with it, and he wanted to research it. Just dumbass luck. The University of Utah said, hey, we'll fund some research on this. So they moved Andrew down, and that's where it all started. Park City was the first group to get involved with the U with it. We followed, and then after that, a number of different agencies, including some of the county, and then UPD as well, got involved with it. And so a lot of the information that we have on us comes right from our own state. Unfortunately, for us, really fortunate for nurses, Dartmouth saw what was going on, and they said, we want to do the same thing for nurses. And they stole Andrew, and now he lives back east again, and he's doing everything for nurses and coming up again with some wonderful information that's also very similar to what we already knew. We share the same neurology. There are 5 different jobs that tend to support the same neurologic base. Police, including corrections, fire, including EMS, nursing, dispatching. Now they're looking at school teachers. We all kind of gravitate toward those jobs because of that. It helps support the kind of personalities that we have. Is everybody clear on that piece? Okay, now we're going to jump into the neurology a little bit deeper.
Do you use the arrows on that keyboard? It'll just.
I'll do it a little faster. So, one of the things that they noticed is that we have a high amount of stress in our jobs. These are just some basic definitions of stress. When we go and do peer support training for the department, we actually use this PowerPoint. We teach you how to give the lecture, but we talk about stress, and then we're not doing it in this one, but we have some things that the U has suggested that we do for stress, including the sleep hygiene program that I'm going to be talking about in just a minute. All right. So we go through an alarm response cycle. You have your alarm, you go into the resistance phase when you get really amped, and then it dies out with exhaustion, okay? In order to do this, I'm gonna use this board just because it's a little bit more space. So regular person, will go throughout their day with different levels of stress. They kind of go up and down on this. And instead of using the word stress, I'm going to use excitement. Okay? And let's say this person's driving down the street and they get a call from their best friend that their best friend got their dream job. Yay! Their excitement will go up, but it doesn't go up very high. But let's say that same person is driving down the street and they start sliding on black ice. Then their excitement's going to shoot way up. When this happens, a chemical change takes place in the body. Cortisol goes down, serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline all shoot up in the form of epinephrine and norepinephrine. And the person can then start to work on saving themselves. I'm just going to show you a quick picture of the brain so you can see how this affects it. So a regular person spends most of their time here in the prefrontal cortex. When this chemical change takes place, they go into the limbic system, which is this squiggly part right here. Now, if I were to get emotional, like, oh good Lord, who's going to take care of my fill in the blank of whatever I care about, I would go back to the prefrontal cortex where my emotionality is, and my limbic system couldn't turn on and do what it needs to do to save me. So what my body does is it puts a block so I can't return here when I'm in a life-threatening situation. Everybody with me so far? Cool. All right, so back to this. Those chemicals get released, and the following behaviors turn on, and I'm going to show you a slide in just a sec. But you have fight, flight, freeze, feed, breed. Job security for us, freeze usually kicks in first. Person just holds on to the wheel and doesn't do anything. If freeze lasts a long enough period of time, then fight kicks in and they'll fight to try to get a hold of the wheel. Whenever that stops, then what happens is cortisol turns back on, serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline all go down, and that takes 90 minutes. Okay? That's a regular person, not us. How we're different is we tend to be backward. We spend more of our time in the limbic system than we do in the prefrontal cortex. Okay? Part of the reason we gravitate toward these jobs that we do is because we're in the limbic system more, these behaviors tend to be more in line with what we do. And so we go into these because of that. It helps satisfy those things. One of the things I found in the research is when we do productive things to satisfy those, our PTSD and stress rates go way down. When we don't, and our body takes care of those things by themselves, it usually does it in a way that handles the path of least resistance. Then they go up. So learning to feed our own limbic system and be in charge of it, rather than it being in charge of us, is turning out to be really, really important. So,
I have a question.
yeah.
So does the job specifically for deputies, and other first responders, does it not require you to stay in the limbic system in order to complete your duties? Because if you are trying to regulate while you're at your job, then you're gonna be turning off the system that you need to use in order to act.
I love where your head's at. Have you sat through this before? Because that's a
No.
perfect segue. That's right where I was going. So what this looks like for us is our excitement level sits about right here. Okay? It takes a lot more to get us excited, but when we do get excited, we freak way the fuck out. We go up here. Okay? So, what happens is we first get on the job, and you are exactly right. First we go through post, or if you're a nurse, you go through that awful piece of nursing school that takes forever. If you're a fire guy, you go through boot camp. But one of the things that takes place in that process that we need to really think about changing in how we train is mistakes equal what? In nursing school, if you make a mistake, what's going to happen? Failure, and ultimately you push the wrong med, this patient will die. Yeah, failure and death, you go through post, you don't clear the room right, you just killed your partner. we start doing mistakes equal death with everything. And that's really important. And it's mostly not true. How many of you have ever made a mistake on the job? Yeah, it wasn't cataclysmic probably. We're still standing, the world is still here, right? Doesn't mean that we don't want to do a good job, but we put that level of stress on ourselves that if I screw up, and that's why if we do make a mistake, no matter how small, we kick our own ass for the next 2 weeks because that's geared into us. But I digress. We go through that training period, whatever it is, and they intentionally throw us in the limbic system. That's why your fail rate, like if you're nursing school, 80% below that is an F. You get arbitrary demerits and gigs when you're going through post. Fire does the same thing. The whole point is to get you to that level so they can drum out freeze. Because if you freeze, you're going to be worthless in these jobs, right? You're going to become part of the problem rather than solution. So they intentionally keep you up there to do that. Then we get out and we immediately go into a really busy area. They don't put new people in slow areas. So let's say, who's one of our nurses? Where did you do your first rotation out of school? Do you remember?
Well, I think I went to a care center actually to finish my second year, so.
Okay, perfect, care center. What they'll do is they'll say, here's your team, have a good shift. And they walk away, and all of a sudden all these call lights start lighting up, boom, 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 boom. And you don't have a CNA that day, and so you're just like, what the hell do I do now? And then you see somebody wandering out of the room naked, and you're like, my responsibility, mistakes equal death, they're naked, everybody's gonna die. And then you realize you haven't peed all day, and you haven't eaten, and you are just up here. You don't get the 90-minute gig, you just go straight. Same with going into corrections. It never stops. You're constantly there, turned on the whole time you're there. So you're staying up here. With fire and police, you go on calls. You shoot up when you go on the call, when you hear the alarm go off, or when you hear a call sign go. And then you start to come down, but within 90 minutes, you keep getting stuff. In any case, staying in this for a prolonged period of time, because you do need to be in it in order to complete your task. Your body trying to come out of it, though, is incredibly unhealthy in that chemical change. They're finding it wrecks our kidneys, does brain damage, particularly to the hippocampus, and it also does cardiac damage. So what your body does to make it a little bit easier on you is when you hit around 5 years on, you just stay. Your body stops trying to come out. And so you're always on a call. So freeze is gone. We have effectively left the prefrontal cortex, gone into the limbic system. That block is there, so we can't return back here. And so this then becomes our behavioral range. And then our emotional range comes from the amygdala, that little bump in the limbic system. And this becomes our emotional range. We have access to anxiety, rage, and love. It seems strange that love is there, but if you think about it, anxiety goes with flight, rage goes with fight, love goes with breed. At least it should. So we get stuck in this, and this is what it looks like. This is particularly true for nurses and paramedics, but all first responders do it to a certain degree. Nurses are the worst. You smell everything. You walk in, you go, first thing you do is you smell. And it just becomes an automatic response. And what they found in looking at it is you're smelling for what? Think about it. What do you smell for?
It'd be detection.
Mm-hmm. Now there are certain things that have an obvious smell. Way dead is one. Can't miss that one. GI bleed, that's 3 doors down, you can tell that. But pneumonia has a smell, COVID has a smell, cancer has a smell, Pseudomonas has a smell. And you can pick it up, they're like, oh, they smell like Pseudomonas. And they're like, yep, green snot, there you go. But we smell things, and all first responders do it to a certain degree. So when we get home after our shift, we walk into our house, and the first thing we do is we go, why does my house smell like shit? And then we start looking. Then we're like, why are there dirty dishes in the sink? When I left, there were dirty dishes in the sink. Doesn't anybody do anything while I'm gone? Am I the only one that works in this damn house? And why is the garbage can full? This is horrible. And my kids, how many times have I told those little bastards to pick their shit up? Now I have a shoe and I'm walking. Now I have to do dishes. And I get home and I'm doing dishes and holding a shoe. And my partner comes in and they're like, oh, you're home. And then they see you doing dishes with a shoe and they go, shit. And they start trying to creep out. And we go, aren't you even going to say hi? That's what fight looks like. We are on edge and we snap and we're angry. And we just, we're always right there. What flight looks like is a little bit different. We generally start with alcohol. And to keep that feeling down, we'll drink too much. What ends up happening with that though is eventually either one of two things. It'll start to interfere with home and work, so we'll back off, or it's a weight issue because of feed, and we'll talk about that. But you say, I gotta cut back on my drinking. So then what happens is we can't sit still, and we are working constantly. And we work 2, 3, and 4 jobs, and we take overtime shifts like crazy. Working PRN shifts, if you're a nurse, you just don't stop. And then when you do go home, you have like 4 projects always that you never finish, and they're always just there. And you're like, I'm gonna get around to it one day, and then you get really mad at yourself because you didn't do it. And then pretty soon your partner says, you know what, it would be really cool if you came home, and if when you were home you were present. And then we say, you know what, the reason I work so much is so we can afford, and what do most first responders drive?
Big trucks.
Big ass truck, okay, 2 or 3 on the side of it. And we have to have a 250 or 350 if you're doing it right on the side, so we can pull the big ass trailer. And in the big ass trailer, we have 2 brand new side-by-sides, because it's a toy hauler, and we have a shitty 4-wheeler that we couldn't sell on KSL that the in-laws drive. And we're pulling 250 grand down the road. We don't make that much. And so then we start hyper spending. We become the kings and queens of Facebook Marketplace and KSL. We are so good at that. And then what we do is we say, we look at our partner and we always blame it on them. You've been very cavalier with our finances. I need to fix this. And then we start. And we sell all our shit on KSL except the big ass truck, because deep down inside, we know what's coming next. Summer rolls around, and then what do we need? Boat! Need the boat and the 2 wave runners. That's what we need, and the cycle continues. That is flight. Damn it, I forgot I can do this. See, technology and me. While this is all going on with fight and flight, our anxiety because of the amygdala right here is getting worse and worse and worse. It builds. And our adrenal response gets really out of control. And living with all that adrenaline constantly, again, is horrible on our bodies. But that's creeping up while this is happening. Okay. We don't really have freeze. Feed looks like this. We eat too much, we eat too fast, we eat like shit. And because we don't produce cortisol like we should, we have a really hard time managing our weight. When it gets on, we have a hard time losing it. Much harder time than regular people do. You can go on any of the diets that we're doing right now, keto or paleo or whatever you want to do. You might lose 5 pounds, but you're going to gain 10 back. We've even seen people get gastric bypass with the band and beat that. Lose like 150 pounds, and they'll gain it all back within like 3 or 4 years. And it's mainly because of 2 big issues. We eat so fast. One of the things that they are encouraging us, when I say they, it's the you, are trying to get us to pay more attention to, is to make our first helping of food last about 20 minutes if we can. I tried this. I got a fork and I sat down and everything. I started eating and I hit start. I'm like chewing my food, which was interesting. And I'm eating it and I'm like, huh, I'm probably about 15 minutes in, so I finished up eating. And then I looked at my clock, it was 7.5 minutes. Our body doesn't even feel full for 20 minutes. And usually by 20 minutes, we've had 2 or 3 helpings in. And that's why the weight problem gets worse. When the weight problem gets worse, then our departments say we need a fitness initiative. And they start doing fitness testing, which makes us more anxious, which compounds the problem. Or we do the exact opposite. We forget to eat. We absolutely forget to eat, and we just don't. And we'll go like, it'll be nighttime, like, I'm kind of hungry. Damn, I didn't eat anything all day. And everybody, particularly nurses, you go to any nurse's station, there's like the Battle of the Stanleys, there's 10 million, see that color, all sitting up there. And they never touch them. I don't know why you get them. They just stay there. You're like, I forgot to eat and drink. And then we're telling our patients, we need to get you eating so you can, and we're like, so hypocrites. That's what feed looks like. Part of the reason we have a really hard time losing the weight too has to do with breathing. So remember, this happens at about the 5-year mark. We call that the indoctrination phase. The last thing you want to do when you're on a call is to have sex when you're at work. Okay, if that's not true, then we need to talk afterward. And we'll find an office and we'll chat about that, because damn, particularly working here. But how it, right? Your mind just goes. But how your body manages that is when you're going along and it says, okay, we don't want to have sex, it drops your testosterone. And this is both in men and women. And testosterone is really important for our sex drive. So remember, when you're 5 years on, you're only 27 to 32 on average. And so you start having these symptoms. You feel really achy all the time. Your joints just feel like they're hardening up and you can't move very well. You have no energy, your exercise energy goes way down. You start getting headaches pretty easily. Your skin gets really dry and itchy. And then you lose your sex drive. You just don't have a desire for sex. And even if you try, this is where erectile dysfunction, I use the proper clinical term this time, comes in men, and in women it's just not there. So what happens is you go into the doc and they say, well, let's do a hormone panel on you, and they find out your testosterone is low, and they go, oh, your testosterone is low. And what does the doc do? Just throws testosterone at you and says, here, you need to inject. Or here's some gel. If you're a guy, they'll push gel on you. It doesn't work as well as the injections. Studies are finding. Women generally just do the injections. But they'll throw it at you, but nobody ever asks why. They ever say, gosh, I wonder why a 27-year-old has a testosterone of an 80-year-old. That's weird. Anyway, here's some tests. We'll see you next time. Well, because we do what we do and we are the personalities that we are, when 1 is good, what is 2? Better. That's right. So we have a tendency to use too much testosterone. That makes our fight response get worse. We get angrier again. And at the same time, our sex drive comes up. But now we're kind of poisoning the well around us because we're more angry. Well, about 12 years on, what happens is our body says, you've been on this event for 12 years, you're going to die. We need to propagate the species. So then what it does is it turns your sex drive back on and it goes through the roof. The guy that first paid attention to this has affectionately named it fight or fuck response. Because you want sex all the time, but you're being such a prick of misery that nobody wants to have sex with you. Quite the dilemma. And so then what ends up happening is we start to go toward alternative sexual practices. This is where porn use comes in. We have a huge porn problem in our industries. Porn use goes through the roof. We end up having, because people are watching porn, they're normalizing what they see there, and that becomes what to them sex is. And so kink levels get much higher. This is where we start to see couples start engaging extramaritally, whether that's through swinging, open relationships, or cheating. This is also where we see a lot of times the guy will bring home the duffel bag that he went shopping for at Blue Boutique, and he sets it down and he unzips it. look what I got, honey, to spice up our sex life. And he pulls it out. It's got a pull start and a power stroke. And he goes, and it goes, and our partners go, oh, hell no. And oh, no, this is for me. And that's why right around that 12-year mark, we start to see the first divorce happen. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are on your first marriage still? That's really impressive, about half of you. How many are on your second? Okay, anybody on your third? Just wait, one of us will be on our third by the end of it. The other thing that we start to see is criminal activity take place here. If you pay attention to it, if you look at like teachers sleeping with their students, if you look at how long they've been on, it's about 12 years. Corrections workers having sex with inmates, ew, that usually happens around 12 years. Police officers sleeping with CIs or with sex workers, 12 years. All happens right around that time. The other really sad thing that happens at this time is brain damage starts to occur. So I mentioned it damages our hippocampus. Our hippocampus does a lot of different things, but one of the main things it controls is memory and learning. And our memory starts to just go to hell. We can't remember anything. Like, why did I come in this room? And you're like, I can't. And then it gets so bad that you're like, that is called a chair. Damn it, what's wrong with me? And we start thinking we're going into kind of an Alzheimer's thing, and we get really scared, and we're like, does anybody in my family have Alzheimer's? And we worry about it all the time. It's not that, it's this. We want to get people help before they get to this point. And so we really want to start targeting the 5-year on. How many of you are over 5 years? How many of you are at the 12-year mark?
Over.
How many of you are over 20? We're doomed. It doesn't matter when you get in, help can be had, but we really want to concentrate on getting people in for their first therapeutic sessions around that 5-year mark. Yeah.
So you brought up, like training academies or nurses going through nursing school. Are we doing things wrong by keeping them in that level during that training academy, or are we doing them a disservice?
So I can't speak for most. Nursing schools don't do it. Part of the problem that we run into is when you have an academic-based program that's sponsored through a university, you have to meet certain criteria in order for it to be accredited. If you've been watching the news lately, they've been talking about thousands of nurses went and got fake nursing degrees and things like that. Accreditation is a huge deal. And they pack nursing school literally down to the minute. And they just don't have any time to have anything else in there. Post has started to, and fire departments, because there's not a standard like Post, some fire departments do, some don't. Dispatches, both city and VEC, have started doing it for their onboarding process. But we need to do better. We just need to do better. That's why I do this for free. And I go all over the state doing this because it's that important. I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through. And if you have any power to push that, please do. But with nursing, they don't really have a way to make it work at present, just simply because of the accreditation issue. Same with paramedics, it's exactly the same thing. You are down to the limit. They can't add anything, so that sucks. But make change in your own world. Let's talk about the emotions. How many of you are anxiety people anyway to begin with? I like it whenever we talk about it, people, I'm like, no, hell no, I've got anxiety to beat the band. How many of you have seen the movie Inside Out? If you haven't seen it, it's a cute show, right? Those are the primary emotions except for love, all right? Primary emotions are like primary colors. They combine to create new emotions. We only have 3. And when you're stuck in there, this is our emotional range. And we're really good at all 3 of those. When we love, we tend to fall in love really hard. I remember my therapist when I was going through it. It's right during my divorce. I remember her saying to me, "You love really unnaturally. It shouldn't affect you like this," and it was really affecting me. But that's why our divorces really damn near kill us, and oftentimes do. Breakups do that. when a dog dies or a pet dies, good Lord. My last one, the nurse that was helping us quit because I had a high-speed come apart. Love is a big thing for us. Well, our body does its best to deal with this, and the first thing it will do is anxiety and love. It will mix that. What behaviors do you think we see when we mix anxiety and love? Control. This is where your partner will tell you you're being really controlling. Because what it comes from is it starts with being worried about their safety. If they're 5 minutes late to anything, we're texting your friends, have they left yet? Have they left yet? And we're texting you, where are you, where are you? If you have kids and they start driving, they're more than 5 minutes late. When they get in, we really rage out, we take away their birthday, they will have no friends. And then we realize we just grounded ourselves because we have to drive them everywhere. So then we just yell at them again and let them drive. But that happens first. After that, we start worrying about infidelity. They're cheating on me, they're cheating on me. And so we start going through their phone when they're in the shower and we're like, who the hell is dad? And we get all pissed off at that shit. The next thing that we see is rage and love. Number one thing that we all get arrested for in all of those professions we talked about, domestic violence. Number one thing. Number two thing is DUI. The domestic violence is our number one. When you mix all three of these together, you get frustration. Think about it. You're mad, but you care about the thing you're frustrated about, otherwise you wouldn't care, and you worry about it. That's what frustration is. And we are the most frustrated sons of bitches to walk the planet. I'm serious. We can be frustrated about anything. And if we don't have something to be frustrated about, we will make our own frustration. We will go out of our way to cause problems just to be frustrated. And then the best thing is when people say, you just maybe need to calm down and not be so frustrated. That helps. That's our emotional range. After a while, I want you to think about it. Feeling of frustration. If you didn't know what it was, just focus on the feeling. That hurts. It literally hurts. So does anxiety. Anxiety is an awful pain. Our body can't differentiate between emotional pain and physical pain. It just recognizes it as pain. After a while, the pain gets too intense and your body will cut off your ability to feel. That's when numbness starts. We start to feel numb. I don't feel anything. And when you have people tell you that, they are in a danger zone. So you look for those, the weird sexual piece start coming in, cheating, doing all that. You look for feeling numb. Those people are in that brain damage mode. We need to get them help right away. And it's really sad because we'll run into them and we'll go and talk to our coworkers. Man, I'm worried about so-and-so. They're just not acting right. But we never tell the person we're worried about them that they're not acting right. We need to do better because it makes a difference. I'm going to get to this in just a minute. I'm going to go back to this real quick. Any questions on anything so far? Okay, the second thing the limbic system does is it takes everything that we do and it divides it into an emotional component and a logical component. Logical component is handled by the cerebral cortex. Emotional component is handled by the prefrontal cortex. So if I'm eating Captain Crunch, great cereal, the emotional component is I really like Captain Crunch. Logical component is I have to chew my food. Everybody got that? So I'm going to use a dramatic example, but liken it to an example in the specialty that you work in. Really common one for police and fire is a dead baby call. Super rough call, but it's one that we go on, unfortunately, quite frequently. They usually happen first thing in the morning because the baby has died sometime during the night. When we get there, we know the baby has been down too long to bring back usually. But when the police get there, the first thing that they get is mom screaming and handing them this baby, saying, "Save my baby." Police officer immediately goes into logic mode because if they've been on over 5 years, they can't access over here. So they know exactly how to do compressions, and they're doing it. At the same time, they're calling for every resource they need. They're setting up a crime scene tentatively. They're getting help. Their sergeant's going to be there in a minute. They're going to help control the scene. And he's waiting for medical to get there. Fire shows up. The first thing they do is they hand it to the medic. She takes the baby and she's like, "I know this baby's dead, but mom is screaming. They've already started care. we're just gonna continue until they start working on the baby. The hospitals used to let us just take the baby to the hospital and they would pronounce the baby there. They won't let us do that anymore because they're like, hell no, we hate doing it too. You guys do it, you have contact and you don't have to bill them, we have to bill them. So stop doing that. So now we have to work the person for 40 minutes on scene. That's why if you're ever on a full arrest, you don't see us move. Only if we get a heartbreak back will we move faster than that. So we work them for 40 minutes on scene. And we're doing everything. We know how much epi to push because it's asystole and we know it's not gonna get past asystole. We know exactly how to drill into the leg to get the IV if we can't get one normally. We know exactly how to handle every logical step. Well, because this is Utah, when they're doing that, people just start coming into the house because they see the flashies, right? So you've got religious leader, you've got somebody with a weird casserole with tuna in it. You've got, and there's peas in it and carrots and weird shit. Then you have other people coming in that are family members. Suddenly you have a full audience. You hit that 40-minute mark, now you have to stand up and you have to announce, because at this point, the police know what's happening and they've moved out of the room because they know what's coming. Then we have to go and tell the parents and everybody else that's here, we couldn't save the baby, which we knew we couldn't anyway. At that time, you hear the scream. For those of you that have experienced a scream, it's the worst sound that you will ever hear and it never leaves. At least I haven't had it leave yet. Mom starts screaming, she will do one of three things. Either get really mad and start yelling at you, she will either hit you or bar the door and tell you to save her baby and not let you leave, or she will fall on the ground and she will become the next patient. Then we have to start working on that patient. If it was just the baby alone, that would be a hard enough thing to deal with. But this is all of it. We try to send that to the prefrontal cortex for processing. That block is there, and we can't. So it hits that block, and just like an old school fax machine, it'll keep trying to send it when it hits a busy signal. Our brain does the same thing. It just keeps trying to send it when it gets the block. That's why when we first start our jobs, within the first year, we have flashbacks. Then we stop having flashbacks. Because, like it or not, that was the first call of the day. Then you go on a traffic accident where somebody's paralyzed, and you got to deal with that. Then you got to deal with administrative nonsense. Number one exacerbator to our PTSD is administrative issues. Number one, it's going to make it the worst. So we need to start adding and keeping command staff involved with mental health issues. My past two chiefs have been really excellent at this. We are very fortunate. It's up to us as peer support and boots on the ground to get them involved. They're too busy to do it otherwise. So let them be a part of it. They're now suggesting that we put chief officers on our peer support team as well. Because where did our chiefs come from? The field. And about when do they get promoted? This is funsies. 12 years. And then we think, I wonder why. Now you know. But a chief, I know it took a minute, right? But a chief isn't going to feel comfortable going and talking to a captain a lot of times. That's why it's important to have other chiefs on there. And it's important that you find allies within your administration to do that. Okay. When this gets full and that block is there, it's going to get full of all those emotional issues. We start to get bogged down. This is when we start seeing the numbness happen. This is when we start seeing those big fight responses start coming in. We want to deal with it, but we can't figure out what to do. So we try to deal with it naturally and fall asleep and dream. When we fall asleep and dream, that block goes away. And it starts going down. And like I said, if it was just a dead baby and we didn't have anything else to do, we would probably have a couple of nightmares about it, but we would process it and it would go away. Wouldn't affect us as badly. But trauma chains, that's one of the things that they found with this, and this is why traditional therapies don't work very well for us. Because every person that we deal with, and think about just how many people you deal with in a day, that all chains and it becomes a big long chain of trauma. So when that block goes down, it starts to go down, it hits there and your prefrontal cortex says, this is way too much shit to deal with, I can't do it. And it sends a bolt of adrenaline to wake you up, and that happens between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning. That's why y'all wake up during that time. And you wake up and you go, I don't know why I'm awake. I'm awake. Maybe I need to pee. And you'll go do that and you'll come back, no, that wasn't it. I wonder what I could think about to go back to sleep. And then your mind starts spinning. Anxiety kicks in. I wonder what would happen if giraffes wore socks and things like that. And then you can't fall asleep and your search history is just bizarre as hell when you wake up in the morning. Those are my favorites. So, we're not producing necessary chemicals that we get when we sleep. Number one that we do is serotonin. And guess what time we produce that? Between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning when we go into deep REM sleep. What does serotonin do for our bodies? Anybody know? It helps with our mood. It does one other really important thing. Sleep-wake cycle. So now we have a hard time falling asleep, and now we're waking up between 3:30 and 5:30 in the morning. What the U found was the average person that falls under our job demographics, the average, if they are healthy, is only getting 6 hours of sleep a night. 6 hours is it. Is that safe? If we're in crisis of any type, financial issues, divorce issues, relationship issues, kid issues, we get 4 hours of sleep a night on average. And look at yourselves. When was the last time you can honestly say, I slept 8 hours for a full week? Can anybody in this room say that? Way to go, self-care. That's important because we need to do better with that too. Well, because we're not producing serotonin and we're staying awake, our serotonin levels are incredibly low. What does a person usually act like when they're depressed? What's the number one thing that you see? What's the number one emotion that you see in depressed people? Anxiety is one. That's a big bulge. What's the second one? Sadness. We get depressed. But remember, we don't have sadness. So we see an increased anxiety when we're depressed and usually rage. We get more anxious and we get grumpier. And then what happens is because we can't go to that emotional place in our brain very easily, the only thing we can do is, because we have such a strong logical tie, because of everything we process there, we go to logic. And the decision to commit suicide isn't an emotional one, it's a logical one. I've messed up my finances, my kids hate me, they're afraid of me, I've just screwed everything up, I'm gonna kill myself. And it's usually not a planned out thing. It's just a one-day thing. One of my very best friends in the entire world, his name was Doug Robinson. If any of you knew Doug, you would know why. Doug worked for us for 30 years, and when he retired, he went to go work for an EAP here locally, teaching this to first responders. That's what he did. He took care of the north side of the valley. When he did his last station that he was doing, he went home, went into his shed, turned on his John Deere, and asphyxiated himself. He had free mental health care for the rest of his life. The EAP gave him that. And when somebody kills himself in our line of work, we always say the same thing. I never saw it coming. It's because all those suicide prevention classes they give us are for regular people. We don't do those things. We don't give away our possessions. We don't get sad and moody. We don't suddenly have bright elation and joy right before we kill ourselves. We just don't do that. Because we don't have access to those emotions. We get more anxious, we get more angry, and we isolate. If the person stops hanging out with you during breaks, if they're not hanging out at the nurse's station, if they're not hanging out in your room, start to worry a little bit. And just come right out and say, are you okay? Are you okay? If you ask somebody that, it'll at least let them know that you give a shit. They may not, and you'll be able to tell, yeah, I'm fine. You'll be all grouchy and shit. you'll know they're not okay. If you feel comfortable pushing them further, push them further, but at least they know you care and they're likely to go and talk to you. Just asking if they're okay. Do I not seem okay? Actually, no, you seem really anxious and angry today. One of the things I've learned about is that can happen to us with PTSD and depression. Things okay at home? The other thing that you will see is a person will express a lot of guilt. Man, I really screwed this up. Whether it's a call, a procedure, a protocol. Guilt is our twin with PTSD. So we'll notice guilt. People that talk about feeling bad about stuff a lot. I wish I would have, you'll hear that a lot. That is one thing that we do quite a bit. So, as I mentioned, I went through all of this. About 5 years on, started to do, I'm a fight-flighter, started raging really bad, everything was angry. Everybody at my house was walking on eggshells. And you'll hear that a lot from partners and kids. Yeah, you have to be really careful, and we can tell by the way the door slams what person's coming home, or I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, but they're really hand grenades. That was me. Things got really ugly with it. Back then, this was 2010. They didn't have the therapies that we do now. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. And I talking about feelings just wasn't something that we did back then. And mental health wasn't a push. And I drove my family completely away. I didn't go home because I was a flighter. I didn't go home in July once. Not like a day in July. I didn't go home at all in July. I was working 4 different jobs. With the station, I was overnight for 48. I was doing training. I'd done a 2-week training in Mercury, Nevada for some rad stuff that we did. I was working at the hospital, and I was working part-time here at the time. I was got on as a SWAT medic with UPD and was keeping my certs that way. And I just stopped going home, and I remember I got off my hospital shift and was coming home, and it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I remember calling home thinking, gosh, nobody's answering, and my kids were young then, so I was like, they should be home. And I got home and she had left. She had cleaned out the house, left. There was a note there that she had left. I got the divorce papers at work. That was fun. And she even said, you've been served. And I went, you really say that shit? And she said, yeah, we do. Then we stared at each other awkwardly, and I went, bye. Opened it up, and I learned about fractions, particularly half. And learned how you could apply half to your life. And it was an ugly divorce. And I started to get really, really suicidal. And I got home from a warrant one day, and I put my Glock on the counter. Nobody's at home anymore. I opened the cabinet, and I'm like, what should I have to eat for breakfast? And I'm like, there's Captain Crunch. I like it. Cuts up the roof of my mouth, though. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And I was like, she left shredded wheat. Who the hell eats shredded wheat? Some nasty shit, fiber nonsense. And I went, I'll just eat this. And I picked up my Glock and I put it right here. And I went, what the fuck did you just do? And to show you how much I didn't know, the first thing I did, I panicked and I called our HR. And bless his heart, I don't mean that in a southern way, I generally mean it. His name's Cal Ricotta. He answered the phone. I'm like, hi, this is Layne Hilton. I just tried to kill myself. I was wondering if you could tell me where to go for help with that. And pause. Who is this? It's like first thing in the morning. And I repeat it, and he goes, let me get you with somebody. He called our EAP. I'm not going to mention our EAP, but it was horrible. Lady was great. Got to session number 3, and she said, I can't see you anymore. I thought I broke a rule or something. I'm like, why can't you see me anymore? Did I do something wrong? She goes, oh no, your EAP only covers 3 sessions. Can you imagine trying to do cognitive behavioral therapy with a massively exposed PTSD person in 3 sessions? So I'm like, okay, what do I do? And she goes, you gotta see somebody on your insurance. So she hands me this paper with yellow highlighter on it. And I went to the first name on the list, and I got there, it's downtown. And I walk in, and remember, This isn't something that we normally would do anyway. But I walk in and there's a water wall, and you have wind chimes, and little fans on them, and it smelled like patchouli or a nasty lady's couch. And this little short fat dude with a sweater vest comes out in a beard, and he goes, "Come on in." And I'm like, "Oh, shit." And I sit down with this dude. By the end of the session, he was crying. "I don't know how you guys do what you do." And I'm like, "Do you need a hug, bro? Here, switch places. You can tell me about your mom." I think that's how this is supposed to work. In any case, I got up and I was like, therapy is bullshit. I'm never doing that again. Well, I was living in Glendale and Salt Lake because divorce, and I was walking to McDonald's because feed, and I love that filthy, dirty clown and his quarter pounder with cheese. And I'm strolling there, and I'm getting more and more depressed as I'm going. And right on 17 South and Redwood Road, there's a McDonald's there, right across from where the Gold Cross station is. The University of Utah has a campus hidden right there. And I didn't even know it, and I noticed just miraculously, and I do consider it was a miracle. I looked at the sign, and there was a counseling center. And it was a family center. But I walked in, and again, just being kind of crazy at the time, I went, "Hey, I'm really suicidal, I need help." And I met my angel there. Her name was Lonnie. And Lonnie stuck with me for about 18 months, and she got me better. I love her. I owe her a blood debt or a body removal, whatever she wants. But she saved me. She saved me, and she got me better. And when I got better, and I wasn't such an angry bastard, I started dating my ex again. And then we ended up getting remarried. And now I have a 10-year-old. Don't judge. And we have a really awesome life. We have a really great life. And I'm so glad I didn't ever make a bad situation a permanent situation. I'm so thankful that Lonnie was in my life and she saved me. And that's why I became a therapist, because I didn't want anybody to have to go through that shit. Not anybody I cared about in the jobs that I do. Because we have it hard enough, and we don't ever get the right support that we need, and we keep everything inside, and we feel like we can't talk to anybody. So I was like, I'm gonna give them somebody to talk to. And so I went back to school and I did it. And this has been my push ever since. It's education and helping us, and I only work with us. I've linked myself to as many of the EAPs as I can so I can see us. I'm not affiliated with this one, obviously, and I'm not affiliated with IHC, but I am for most of the rest of them. And then I do this full time there, and then work for a private business. I run 2 groups a week for porn addiction. That's how bad it is. One's for us and one's for our children, because it's really, really, remember, this is neurological, so there's a genetic component. If you don't believe me, look at your family history. I bet you had nurses, firefighters, school teachers, cops. I bet they're in there. I'm like 5 generations deep in teacher, 2 in cop, 2 in fire. I was the only one who did nursing. But it's up to us to say something. It's up to you now that you know this to say something. And what you say really can make a difference. I'm so glad that one dude in HR didn't get freaked out by me calling that, and he at least put me on the road to therapy. If I would have had peer support, I would have talked to him.
As a mental health therapist, I would like to know which modalities are best for treatment for first responders.
We're gonna do that right now. So when they did the white papers on us, they said cognitive behavioral therapy. This is more for the clinicians in the back of the room. They always have to say cognitive behavioral therapy because it's cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's adjuncts. I personally, and Andrew, the doc at the U, we both used acceptance and commitment therapy in there and cognitive processing therapy. Those ones work really well. In addition to that, both the FOP, EIFF really push EMDR, really push it, and I see why. It works great. Accelerated resolution therapy, art therapy, I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. It's like really, really strong EMDR. I use it quite often. And then it was really funny. They can't ever say existential therapy, and they couldn't in the white paper, so when you read it, it says something to the effect of, first responders need to start becoming comfortable with their own mortality and the mortality of others. And because this is an underlying theme in their life, that's existential therapy. So I do a lot of existential therapy too. When you do art, it uses a lot of Gestalt work, but not the weird Fritz Perls shit, the helpful stuff, and it does some dream work as well. But those are the ones that we use. What EMDR and art do is they replicate REM sleep while we're awake, which drops that block, and you force process it while you're awake. You're completely alert, you're completely cognizant, it's not hypnosis, it pushes it through. It's rough, but it works super, super well.
By art therapy, you are referring to the similarity of, compared to EMDR, not specifically art therapy.
Yeah, not like coloring, but.
Yeah, okay, because there are two different.
Yeah, and it's accelerated resolution
Yes.
therapy, that's the acronym. A lot cheaper to do than EMDR. My EMDR stuff was really pricey, art's not that bad. And they do a lot of local stuff with it, it's totally worth having.
Did you go through PATH?
I did,
Yeah.
I did that for my EMDR. Accelerated resolution therapy is its own thing. She took it, the originator of it took it to HAP and was like, hey, this is awesome. And they said, it's not EMDR and now you're excommunicated. So she, because you know they get, and so she started her own gig. Dr. Roger Solomon has taken over. Francine Shapiro, who invented EMDR, died. Dr. Solomon took over for her. He's a wonderful person. He's helped a lot with first responders. EMDR is looking at a package for peer support. ART already has it. And that's the safety training. So you actually do simulating that REM sleep. You actually do that with people for anxiety and rage reduction. We've had massive success with it. So much so that we even put it at the beginning of our CISDs now.
So you're teaching peer support members to do this?
All of our peer support people are trained in it. They're actually trained in 3 different types of therapy now.
What are the types?
It's called Mind Shield. It's one that the U invented specifically for first responders. And it's awesome. It's a mix of mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. It's really great. Rich Lambert was the developer of that. We use SAFE-T, which is the art adjunct. And then our CISD, we went away from the Mitchell model and we use a different model now. The originators haven't named it yet. I affectionately just call it the Smith-Perrin model because those are the 2 dudes that are working on it. And it works incredibly well. It uses brief exposure therapy and mindfulness rather than Mitchell. Mitchell model works great for the general public. Studies have continued to show it doesn't work that well for us. This one does work really well.
I'm assuming there are CDs out there that can play.
Yeah, so with the CISD model, like I said, you can do it for free across the street. I do it once a year and train that. And then we constantly are having people from the agencies come down because our peer support team's pretty big. It's about 30 people. And so whenever we have them, I'll let you guys know if you give me a number and just come and do them. Then once a quarter, we practice skills. We do mock CISDs. We do all of that so you guys can come and participate.
The peer support person is matched up with a therapist though to do all that stuff,
Yeah.
right? They're not just.
Well, no, they can do it on their own.
Oh.
Yeah, they work under, the ones that are trained in it to parapros, you can only have a certain amount work under your license. They work under my license to do it. And so, yeah, it works really well.
How many people can you have work under your license?
You what?
How many individuals can you have work under your license?
5?
5?
I think they raised it to 7 now, but it was
You
5.
have to have a certain kind of
Mhm.
hurdle or?
Yeah, and because of that, we have contract vendor therapists, in addition to our EAP. So we have 7 different agencies that we pay, and we have a line item every year of about 50,000 that's just for therapy. And so we pay them. So if you like have a private gig and you wanna be one of ours, let me know and I'll sign you up. And we can get you on that way too, because there's not very many of us that work with first responders. Like I said, right now in the state, there's only 3 full-time agency for the employees. And as far as I know, I'm the only fire one. There's a couple of people in school, but that's nationally. that's still on an active department. We have a number, I wouldn't say a number, but a little more in terms of retired police and corrections. But there's only one, he works for UPD, and that's Rick Ashby, that's active still and a therapist. So we're always looking. As you can imagine, doing trauma therapy, and I'm sure you know, the burnout rate's really high. So we try to spread it around, particularly with our stuff, because it's compound, very complex PTSD, it's not single source. And then you also have to remember 40% of us coming into this job also have some sort of childhood abuse or neglect. So that ties into it. The MDR gets rid of it quick. When I say quick, I mentioned I was in therapy for 18 months. Average time and turnaround is 9 sessions now, is it? That's start to finish.
Yes, that mental health money that was voted on, that 5 million, they actually wrote it, added to the bill to have retired first responders and active first responders to pay for their school. They can apply, and that bill will pay, or that grant will pay for people to get their licenses so they can retire and go into the field.
And I really want everybody to do that because I'm tired. My other specialty is, I was a school teacher for a while. That was my gig for a bit. And I like working with SPEC individuals, particularly the autistic community. And that's what I want to do. I want to retire and go back and just do that community. And so I'm looking to retire as soon as I can find somebody that wants to take my place. So we're looking as far as that goes. But like I said, if you have any desire to do it, please do it. UVU has a really good program. They just started up, and it's a really good CMHC program. I did all my stuff through the U. U has a good social work program. A couple of people have used Grand Canyon University's online one. I'm not a huge online fan for this because you miss out on the labs and things like that traditional schools offer. But if it's gonna get it done, and then just have really good internships. If anybody ever wants to intern, please let me know if you're going through school. And if I can't get you in there, I can get you in with one of the 3 of us, generally. People that we use Jamie Welsh, she's Salt Lake City PD's person. We use a guy named Jed Thorpe for our substance abuse issues. He's an SAC and he works pretty exclusively with us. We use Monarch Counseling. We use Janie's business, Healthier You, and for our Utah County folks, they do EMDR and ART. We have a women's specialist that is just for our female employees, and she does that. Her name's Haley, and she's awesome. And like I said, we're always looking at adding. We just added a group called First Responders First. It's being run by a retired police officer from city that started his own business. So, that's all I have for you. Thanks for listening to my bullshit.